There is a loneliness that destroys a man, and there is a loneliness that transforms him into a god. The difference between the two is not in isolation, but in the courage to think alone when the entire herd thinks in unison. There is a loneliness that destroys a man, and there is a loneliness that transforms him into a god. The difference between the two is not in isolation, but in the courage to think alone when the entire herd thinks in unison. Se quisser posso tentar uma versoenda mais poetica e impactante, mantendo o tom filosofico do original. Quer que eu faça? Acquiesta uma verso pouco mais poetica e impactante. There is a loneliness that destroys a man, and a loneliness that elevates him to godhood. The difference between them lies not in isolation, but in the courage to think alone while the entire herd thinks in unison. Before thinking for yourself, you must create a mental desert. Nietzsche wrote, "You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star." But chaos does not come from external noise. It comes from the silence that exposes your inner void. Why does this work? Because your mind is constantly filled with the world's noise. Other people's opinions, social expectations, cultural narratives. These all occupy psychic space, like a cluttered room where you cannot find anything of value. The mental desert is not the absence of thought. It is the absence of borrowed thought. It is the violent process of emptying your consciousness of everything that did not genuinely originate from you. Nietzsche understood that only in extreme emptiness, in the absolute desert of intellectual solitude, can your true thoughts emerge. Consider Nietzsche himself in 1881, in Sils Maria, in the Swiss mountains. He had broken with Wagner, his former mentor. He had abandoned his academic career. He was financially ruined, physically debilitated, socially isolated. Most men in this position would desperately seek reconnection, validation, company. Nietzsche did the opposite. He delved into the desert. He walked alone for hours. He sat in absolute silence. He refused superficial conversations. And it was precisely at this moment, in the point of greatest isolation, that the idea of the eternal return arose in him. Not because anyone told him, not because he read it in a book, but because there was enough space in his mind for something genuinely new to be born. Today, you carry the herd in your pocket. Every notification is a voice telling you how to think. Every timeline is a consensus being shoved down your throat. You wake up, and before you have even had your own thought, you have already consumed 20 other people's opinions on how you should feel about the world. The professional who never disconnects is not being productive. He is being colonized. The student who studies with music, podcasts, and notifications simultaneously is not learning. He is memorizing the thoughts of others. You do not think for yourself as long as there is an invisible jury judging every thought. Nietzsche said, "You have your way. I have my way. As for the right way, the correct way, the only way, it does not exist." But how many of your thoughts are genuinely yours? And how many are performances for an imagined audience? Here is a brutal truth. Most people do not think. They rehearse. Every thought is pre-tested against an internal jury. Parents, teachers, colleagues, society at large. What would my mother think of this? Would my boss approve? Is this socially acceptable? This internal jury is the death of authentic thought. It is the complete internalization of the herd. You have become your own shepherd, ensuring you never stray too far from the safe fences of approved thinking. Nietzsche called this bad conscience, the voice of other people's values you internalized so deeply that you now believe them to be your own. To think alone requires the murder of this internal jury. Consider Galileo Galilei in the 17th century. He looked through his telescope and saw that the earth revolved around the sun. But here is the crucial point. Many astronomers of the time had access to similar telescopes. They saw the same data. The difference was not in Galileo's eyes, but in his mind. Most other astronomers, upon seeing something that contradicted the Church's doctrine, immediately suppressed the thought. The internal jury, fear of excommunication, torture, social death, censored the observation before it could fully form as a thought. Galileo killed this jury, not immediately, not without struggle, but enough to allow the heretical thought to fully form in his mind. And it cost him 9 years of house arrest. Genuine thought always comes at a price. In 2025, the internal jury does not fear the Inquisition. It fears cancellation. It fears social disapproval. It fears low likes and negative comments. Have you ever self-censored a thought before even fully forming it? Have you had an intuition about something, politics, relationships, career, and immediately thought, but this is controversial, or people will hate me for thinking this? Congratulations. Your internal jury is working perfectly. You are fully domesticated. Practice protected private thinking. Create a notebook or encrypted digital file where you write your genuine thoughts, especially the controversial, socially unacceptable ones, the ones that would make your internal jury panic. It is not for publishing. It is not for sharing. It is for training the muscle of thinking without censorship. Right, what if I am completely wrong about X? What if everyone is wrong about Y? What do I really think, beyond what I am supposed to think? At first, you will censor yourself even on paper. Over time, you will learn to think complete thoughts before judging them. This is intellectual freedom. Fast thinking is not thinking, it is reflex. Nietzsche wrote that modern humanity suffers from spiritual indigestion. We consume information at industrial speed, but we do not metabolize it. Thinking for yourself requires slow, complete digestion. Your brain is not a data processor. It is a digestive organ. Information that is not fully metabolized rots in your psyche, creating confusion and contradiction. Nietzsche observed that the great thinkers of the past, Plato, Marcus Aurelius, Montaigne, read few books, but read them repeatedly, deeply, over years. They chewed each idea until they extracted its full nutritional value. Modern man reads hundreds of books, consumes thousands of articles, but does not think deeply about any of them. This is the difference between information and wisdom. Information is fast. Wisdom is slow. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher who most influenced Nietzsche, spent decades working on his magnum opus, The World as Will and Representation. Not because he was slow or lazy, but because he was digesting it completely. He read Kant. Then he stopped and thought about Kant for months. Took walks. Let the ideas ferment. Only then did he return to the texts. He debated with the ideas in his mind as if Kant were alive beside him. When he finally published his work, it was not a regurgitation of Kant. It was a complete transformation. Kant filtered through Schopenhauer's lived experience, metabolized, and reconstructed into something entirely new. Compare this to the contemporary student who reads a Kant summary online, highlights a few sentences, and believes they have understood the philosopher. You are consuming content at scroll speed. A 3-minute video explaining Nietzsche. A Twitter thread summarizing decades of research. A podcast where someone simplifies complex ideas while you wash dishes. This is not learning. It is educational entertainment. You feel like you are evolving, but you are only accumulating intellectual trivia. You may quote Nietzsche, but you do not think like Nietzsche. Slowly, deeply, in solitude. Implement the 1-10-100 rule. For every important book you read, spend 10 hours thinking about it, and review its main ideas 100 times over the next year. After finishing a significant book, do not immediately pick up the next. Sit with your notes. Walk and muse on the ideas. Write essays for yourself about what the author truly meant. Choose one concept, say Nietzsche's Übermensch, and spend an entire month just contemplating its implications. How does it apply to your life? Where would you resist this idea? Why? Deep thinking is slow by nature. If you are thinking at scroll speed, you are not thinking. So far, you have learned the fundamentals: creating the mental desert, murdering the internal jury, and digesting slowly. These are the foundations of solitary thinking. But there is a difference between thinking alone and thinking through yourself, between having your own ideas and being transformed by them. Nietzsche was not interested in parlor philosophy. He did not want thinkers with interesting opinions about life. He wanted people whose entire existence was the manifestation of their thought. What comes next is not comfortable. These are the tactics that separate the intellectual hobbyist from the true creator of values. If the fundamentals were about protection against the herd, what comes now is about offense. How you become the source of your own values when all external values collapse. Prepare yourself. The descent continues. There is no accessible, objective truth, only more or less powerful perspectives. Nietzsche declared, "There are no facts, only interpretations." The solitary thinker must master multiple perspectives without clinging to any as absolute truth. This is perhaps Nietzsche's most disturbing idea. There is no viewpoint of the universe. There is no neutral, objective, divine perspective. All knowledge is always from somewhere, by someone, for some purpose. This is not cheap relativism. Everything is equally valid. It is the recognition that perspectives have variable power. Some perspectives create life, others destroy. Some expand possibilities, others limit them. The solitary thinker must practice what Nietzsche called the philosophy of the hammer, testing all beliefs by striking them, seeing which crack. Then deliberately adopt opposing perspectives to expand them to the point of rupture. Consider Nietzsche in his middle period, when he wrote Human, All Too Human. He had been a devoted follower of Schopenhauer, absorbing his pessimistic philosophy for years. Then something remarkable happened. Instead of defending Schopenhauer against critics, Nietzsche deliberately adopted the critic's perspective. He became his own harshest antagonist. He wrote, "What if Schopenhauer is fundamentally wrong? What if pessimism is merely a symptom of weakness, not wisdom?" He was not casually rejecting Schopenhauer. He was testing the philosophy from the opposite viewpoint. This mental experiment liberated him. He realized that he had internalized Schopenhauer so completely that he was no longer thinking. He was reciting. Radical perspectivism became his tool of liberation. Do you hold strong political convictions? Excellent. Now spend a week internally defending the opposite position. Not superficially, but deeply. Find the strongest arguments from the other side. Temporarily assume that you were completely wrong. Are you an atheist? Spend a month seriously contemplating the most sophisticated theistic argument you can find. Are you religious? Do the same with the most rigorous atheistic argument. Most people fear this exercise. What if I change my mind? What if I lose my identity? Precisely. If your identity depends on not testing your ideas, you do not have ideas. You have a fragile identity disguised as conviction. Practice the internal devil's advocate exercise. Choose your strongest belief, something you are absolutely certain of. Now, write the most convincing argument possible against it. Not a straw man, but the strongest version of the opposition. Live with this contradiction for weeks without resolving it. Nietzsche called this holding many thoughts in suspension. The inferior mind demands immediate conclusions. The superior mind can inhabit contradiction productively. You will discover something disturbing. Many of your certainties are merely a lack of imagination to conceive alternatives. The enemy of your future self is your present self. Nietzsche proclaimed, "You must be ready to burn yourself in your own flame." How would you rise again if you first did not become ashes? The solitary thinker is in constant war with himself. Most people seek consistency. I am like this. These are my values. This is my identity. They build a persona and spend the rest of their life defending it against change. Nietzsche saw this as death in life. The essence of life is self-overcoming, the constant surpassing of oneself. The you of today should be insufficient for the you of tomorrow. Your ideas today should be insufficient for your ideas tomorrow. This is not self-flagellation. It is intentional evolution. It is refusing to fossilize into a version of yourself merely because it is comfortable or familiar. Consider Nietzsche's own intellectual trajectory. In his 20s, he was a respectable classical philologist. By 30, a disciple of Schopenhauer and Wagner. By 35, he had completely rejected both. Each phase of his thought was not an addition to the previous. It was often a direct negation. The Nietzsche of Thus Spoke Zarathustra would have despised the Nietzsche of his early academic works. In his letters, he wrote, "I change my skin constantly. My old skin will soon seem as repulsive to me as a snake skin." He was not afraid to contradict his former self because he understood that consistency is the virtue of small minds. His intellectual life was a series of self-sacrifices. Every new thought demanded the death of a previous version of himself. Would your self from 5 years ago be friends with your current self? If the answer is an easy yes, you have stagnated. This is not a virtue of loyalty. It is mental laziness. The professional who does the same work the same way for 10 years is not experienced. He is repeating 1 year of experience 10 times. The thinker who holds the same opinions at 40 that he held at 20 does not have strong convictions. He has an ossified mind. In a culture obsessed with finding oneself, Nietzsche invites us to something more disturbing, to perpetually destroy who we find and rebuild something greater. Annually, conduct a convictions audit. List your 10 strongest beliefs. Now ask, how long have I held this belief? Has it evolved? Have I genuinely questioned it? For every belief you have held for more than 5 years without deep review, you must either reaffirm it through rigorous re-examination or discard it completely. There is no middle ground. Create a cemetery of dead ideas, a document where you record all the beliefs you once held and later abandoned, with date and reason. This is not shameful. It is the map of your intellectual evolution. If your cemetery is empty, you are not evolving. You are stagnant. We have journeyed through the mind of one of history's most solitary and misunderstood philosophers. But we did not do this out of academic curiosity. We did it because you live in an age that has made autonomous thinking nearly impossible. And before concluding, a warning that Nietzsche himself would probably give. Thinking alone is not a recipe for happiness. Nietzsche was not happy. He was often miserable, sick, isolated. He ended in mental collapse. Philosophical solitude comes at a price. So why do it? Because the alternative is worse. The alternative is to live as an echo, as a copy, as a processing unit for other people's ideas. To reach the end of life and realize you never thought a genuinely your own thought, that you lived entirely secondhand. The knowledge you have received today is not neutral. You cannot not use it. Now that you have seen the mechanism, how the herd thinks collectively, how you were conditioned, how external validation corrupts, you cannot simply return to comfortable unconsciousness. Use this knowledge first for yourself, to liberate your own mind, to think your own thoughts, to create your own values. Do not use it to manipulate others. Do not use it to feel superior to the herd. That would be the ultimate betrayal of the Nietzschean spirit, using autonomous thought as a tool of domination. Nietzsche dreamed of an elevated humanity, of individuals who needed no masters because they were masters of themselves. He did not dream of philosophical tyrants manipulating the masses. He dreamed of masses awakening to their own capacity for existential authorship. So think alone, but think responsibly. Create your values. but create values that affirm life. Overcome yourself, but do not crush others in the process. Nietzsche's solitude ended in madness. But before that, it produced some of the most liberating thoughts in human history. The question is not how to avoid solitude. It is how to inhabit it productively. How to extract from it not bitterness, but wisdom. Not alienation, but authenticity. This choice, like all real choices, is yours alone. No one can think it for you. Now, a question for you in the comments. Of the 8 laws we explored, from the mental desert to the creation of your own values, which resonates most deeply with where you are on your journey right now? Which is the hardest to implement? Which is the most necessary? Share not for validation, but for reflection. Writing down your thought is a way of thinking it more deeply. If this exploration of Nietzsche's solitary thinking has touched something in you, if you felt the weight and the freedom of what was discussed, subscribe to the channel. We will continue unraveling the thinkers who dared to think alone, who paid the price of originality, and who left maps for those brave enough to follow. And if you believe this knowledge has value, not because it is comfortable, but precisely because it is uncomfortable, leave a like. It is a sign that you are willing to think difficult thoughts in a world that offers only easy ones. Until the next philosophical journey. And remember, the crowd is always thinking. The question is, are you?